A journey of love, regret, and redemption. Welcome to another gripping episode from Life Tells Stories, where we explore the emotional journey of people caught between power, choices, and the consequences that follow. Today, we have a story about the immense power of love, regret, and redemption, set against the backdrop of opulence and sacrifice. Imagine being in the shoes of a billionaire CEO who seemingly has it all: power, wealth, and status, only to come face to face with the consequence of a cold decision made 10 years ago. Today, that forgotten choice returns, with twin daughters staring back at him, reminding him of what he abandoned. What would you do if the people you left behind suddenly appeared in your life, forcing you to face your greatest fears and regrets? Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue to bring you these powerful stories. Now let's get into this emotional roller coaster. It all began on a seemingly ordinary afternoon when Charles Preston, the CEO of one of the most successful conglomerates in the country, found himself walking through a bustling mall. He wasn't there for the shopping or the lively atmosphere. Instead, he had just concluded a routine business meeting, one of the countless appointments that filled his meticulously planned schedule. To Charles, it was supposed to be just another day. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that could alter the course of his life. As Charles moved past the food court, something, or rather someone, caught his eye. He saw a woman with long, dark hair laughing alongside two young girls. They stood near a boutique window, and there was something about them that drew him in. As he looked closer, the resemblance became undeniable. The girls, identical twins, had his piercing blue eyes, his unmistakable jawline. The recognition struck him like a lightning bolt. His heart stopped for a moment, and he found himself frozen. Those girls, they must be his daughters. And the woman with them, Emily, the woman he had once loved deeply and abandoned without looking back. He could barely breathe as emotions he hadn't felt in years surged back into him. Guilt, longing, and a deep sense of loss all swept over him. He had spent years cultivating an image of strength and control, but in that moment, all of it began to shatter. Charles realized he was looking at the life he had once turned his back on, a life he could have had if only he had made different choices. Charles's mind drifted back 10 years to the cold and calculated decision that had set all of this in motion. Back then, he had been a young, ambitious CEO, consumed by the desire to grow his company and make a name for himself in the corporate world. He was married to Emily, an artist who brought color, warmth, and spontaneity into his otherwise stark, structured life. She was everything he wasn't: creative, free-spirited, full of dreams that went beyond contracts and profit margins. But the pressures of running a rapidly expanding business began to wear on him. His company needed him more and more, and as the demands increased, he felt himself pulling away from Emily. He convinced himself that love was a distraction, and marriage was an obstacle to the level of success he wanted to achieve. So he made the cold decision to walk away, to end his marriage so he could focus entirely on building his empire. He hadn't looked back. He had thrown himself into his work, rationalizing that success was worth the sacrifice. But standing there in the mall, seeing Emily and the girls, Charles suddenly realized how wrong he had been. He had missed a decade, 10 years of birthdays, laughter, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. He had traded it all for a vision of success that now felt empty. As Charles stood rooted to the spot, watching Emily and the twins from a distance, he felt a surge of emotions that he was unprepared for. He had always prided himself on his control, on his ability to make decisions without looking back, to move forward without regret. But now, regret was all he could feel. Emily turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. The look she gave him wasn't one of recognition or surprise. It was a guarded, cautious look, as if she was ready to protect her daughters from any threat. There was no warmth, no hint of a smile. It was a reminder that he had chosen to leave her, that he had chosen his empire over the family they could have built together. Charles watched as Emily put her arms around the girls and guided them towards the escalator. His heart ached as he saw them disappear from view. For the first time in his life, Charles Preston felt powerless. He felt an ache he couldn't explain, a sense of loss that seemed impossible to quantify. He had built a life of luxury, wealth, and power, but none of it mattered in that moment. All he wanted was to know those two girls, his daughters, and to be a part of their lives. That night, Charles sat in the backseat of his sleek black SUV, his mind racing with thoughts of Emily and the girls. He had always been a man of action. When he wanted something, he went after it without hesitation. This time was no different. He knew he had to find them, to understand what had happened to the family he had left behind. He returned to his penthouse, the city lights glowing below, and sat in silence. The penthouse, once a symbol of his success, felt empty. He took out his phone and called his assistant, Victoria. She was efficient, discreet, and resourceful. Everything he needed right now. He instructed her to find out everything she could about Emily, where she lived, what she did, and most importantly, about the twins. Victoria didn't ask questions. She simply assured him that she would have the information he needed by the next day. By afternoon, the results were in. Victoria handed him a slim folder, her expression carefully neutral. Emily had moved to Boston shortly after their separation. She had built a modest life for herself, working as a curator at an art gallery. The twins, Clara and Sophie, were 10 years old. Charles could barely breathe as he read through the details. 10 years. They were born just after he had walked away. He felt a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, disbelief. Why hadn't she told him? Had she really thought he wouldn't care? Charles couldn't stay away. He had to see her, had to understand why she had kept all of this from him. He found himself standing outside the gallery where Emily worked. Unlike the towering skyscrapers and the polished boardrooms he frequented, this gallery was a simple brick building. It wasn't grand, but it was full of character, much like Emily herself. He entered the gallery quietly, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. She was standing in front of a painting, speaking to a patron. She looked different, older, more tired perhaps, but still beautiful. He could see the determination in her eyes, the same determination that had once drawn him to her. He hesitated, but then their eyes met, and there was no turning back. Emily's expression shifted from surprise to guardedness. She excused herself from the conversation and walked towards him, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here, Charles?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Why didn't you tell me?" He blurted out, his voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me about Clara and Sophie?" Emily's eyes hardened, and she shook her head. "You walked away, Charles. You made your choice. I wasn't going to force you to care. You were too busy being the almighty CEO, and I had to be there for them. I did what I thought was best." Her words cut deeper than he had expected. He had always been confident in his decisions, but for the first time, he began to question whether he had made the right choice. He had convinced himself that success required sacrifices, but standing there, in that gallery, he realized that the sacrifices he had made had cost him more than he could bear. Charles was not a man who gave up easily. He had built an empire from the ground up, overcoming every challenge that had come his way. This, too, was a challenge, one that he had to face. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that Emily had every reason to keep him away. But he was determined. He needed to know his daughters. He approached Emily again, this time with more humility. He asked her for a chance, not for himself, but for the girls. He wanted to get to know them, to be a part of their lives. Emily's response was cautious. She was protective of her daughters, and she had every right to be. She eventually offered him a path forward. He could meet Clara and Sophie, but only on her terms. He would be introduced as a friend, not as their father. They didn't know who he was, and she wasn't ready to tell them yet. It felt like a demotion. Charles, who was used to being in control, was suddenly relegated to the sidelines. But he accepted. He knew this was the only chance he had, and he was willing to take it. He would do whatever it took to be in their lives, even if it meant starting from the very bottom. The first meeting took place at a small cafe near the girls' school. Charles arrived early, his nerves frayed in a way they never were during business meetings. He had faced hostile boardrooms, made high-stakes deals, and negotiated with some of the toughest people in the industry, but nothing compared to the anxiety he felt now. He was about to meet his daughters for the first time, and he had no idea what to expect. When Emily walked in with the twins, his heart skipped a beat. They were even more beautiful up close. Clara and Sophie were vibrant, full of energy. Sophie was the first to speak, her bright eyes full of curiosity. "Do you like chocolate croissants?" she asked, her smile wide. Charles couldn't help but chuckle. "I do," he replied, "especially with extra chocolate." Sophie beamed, satisfied with his answer. Clara, on the other hand, remained cautious. She watched him carefully, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask. "Girls, this is Charles," Emily said, her tone measured. "He's an old friend of mine." The words stung, but Charles understood. He was just a friend, at least for now. He wanted to win them over, but he knew it would take time. He couldn't rush this. He had to be patient, consistent, and above all, honest. Over the next few weeks, Charles worked hard to build a connection with Clara and Sophie. He started attending their soccer games, showing up at the gallery to visit Emily, and learning about the things the girls loved. Sophie warmed to him quickly. She was cheerful, outgoing, and eager to accept new people into her life. She would run up to him after a game, excitedly telling him all about her latest accomplishments. Clara, however, was different. She was more reserved, more hesitant to trust. She had questions that she wasn't ready to ask yet. Charles understood that he had to be patient with her. One day, as they were walking through the park, Clara turned to him and asked, "Why are you always around now?" Charles hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I care about your mom," he said honestly, "and because I think you and your sister are amazing." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face for answers. She didn't say anything, but Charles could see that she was starting to let her guard down. "By now, I would love to hear from you. What would you do if you were in Charles's shoes? Do you think he deserves a second chance, or is it too late to fix the mistakes of his past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below." Just as things seemed to be improving, an unexpected crisis struck. During a routine doctor's appointment, Clara fainted in the waiting room. The incident left everyone terrified, and Charles rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear. He sat by Clara's bedside, watching her pale face, his heart breaking over what he had missed. He had spent years building an empire, but he hadn't been there for his daughters when they needed him the most. The doctors diagnosed Clara with a minor heart condition. Nothing too serious, but something that required careful monitoring. Charles felt overwhelmed by guilt. How could he protect his daughters if he didn't even know about their vulnerabilities? He had missed 10 years of their lives, and now he was faced with the harsh reality of just how much he had missed. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, her own fear evident in her eyes. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's what matters." Charles nodded, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. He realized that this was his chance to finally be the father they deserved. Not just in the good moments, but in the hard ones too. The following weeks brought significant changes. Charles became more involved in the girls' lives. He researched treatment options, attended every doctor's appointment, and became a steady presence for Clara and Sophie. He wanted to show them that he wasn't going anywhere, that he was here to stay. One quiet evening, as they sat together at home, Clara finally asked the question that Charles had both dreaded and hoped for. "Are you my dad?" The room fell silent. Emily looked at Charles, her expression a mix of apprehension and encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Charles met Clara's gaze and said, "Yes, yes, I am." Clara studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," she said quietly. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or acceptance, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall she had built around herself, and Charles knew that it was the beginning of something meaningful. From that point on, Charles dedicated himself to his daughters and to Emily. He attended every recital, every soccer game, every family event. He learned about Clara's favorite books, laughed at Sophie's jokes, and found joy in the simple, everyday moments that he had once taken for granted. Slowly, the family began to heal. Emily, too, began to soften, allowing Charles back into her life, bit by bit. It wasn't easy. Trust took time, and forgiveness took even longer. But as Charles stood in the audience at the twins' school recital, watching Clara and Sophie perform a duet, he realized that he had found something far more valuable than the empire he had built. He had found a family that loved him, and a family that he would never let go of again. Life is often about the choices we make, and sometimes we only realize the consequences long after the moment has passed. Charles Preston's journey is a stark reminder that success means nothing if you sacrifice the people who mean the most to you along the way. His story is one of redemption, an attempt to make right what he once abandoned, and a struggle to become the man his daughters deserve. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, make sure to hit the subscribe button and leave us a like. Let us know in the comments, do you think everyone deserves a second chance? Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep believing in the power of change. Goodbye.